The snow has not yet settled. You stand now, not in a city of lights, but in the northern silence somewhere far beyond the maps you once studied. A fjord bends beneath you, black water breathing like a lung, and above it, a slab of stone juts from the frozen earth at an impossible angle. Its surface is rough, veined like ancient ice. Yet at the heart of the stone, cut deep enough to survive centuries of storm, is a symbol, a cross. Not the neat cross you know from churches, but one whose arms flare at each end, as if reaching outward, resisting closure. Traces of pigment, the faintest red, cling to its grooves. The locals call it the Stone of the Whispering King. They will not go near it. They say the wind that circles here does not simply howl, it speaks. Close your eyes. Do you hear it? A sound at the edge of language, like syllables slipping from one age into another. For 700 years, the villagers have avoided this place, and yet you are here. Why? Because legends cling to silence the way frost clings to bark. They do not die. The stone is not marked on official surveys. No museum claims it. Archaeologists dismiss it as coincidence, a boulder fractured by ice. But its shape, its placement, its stubborn voice in the wind refuses dismissal. And somewhere in that refusal lies the first question of our journey. What is memory and what is erased? The Merovingian dynasty, sometimes called the first kings of France, ruled from the 5th to the 8th century. They were warrior kings, long-haired monarchs whose flowing locks were said to carry a sacred essence. Their founder, Merovic, was rumored to have been born of a sea creature, half man, half mystery. His descendants, Clovis among them, carved kingdoms from chaos and drew the favor of Rome by baptism. For 3 centuries, their line held crowns anointed not only with oil but with whispers of divine right. And then, silence. In 751 CE, the last Merovingian king was shorn of his hair, removed, and replaced by a new dynasty of the Carolingians, whose alliance with the Pope rewrote history. Official chronicles called the Merovingians do-nothing kings. Their names faded from coins. Their line was declared extinct. But silence does not mean absence. Standing before this stone, you sense it, that the silence is not empty but full of things buried, exiled, perhaps even preserved, because history has edges, and on those edges, strange things remain. The cross etched here resembles not only the Templar insignia of later centuries, but also older Frankish seals used by Merovingian kings. Too early for coincidence, too far for convenience. How does such a mark appear high above the Arctic Circle, far from the Rhine and Seine? Mainstream historians dismiss such connections. They remind us that the Norse carved many crosses, that pigments fade into myth. Yet you notice, why red? Why the flare at the ends? Why the stories of a king who whispers in the wind? Coincidence explains one detail, maybe 2, but when the symbols multiply, dismissal becomes harder. Some fringe researchers believe this stone is a fragment of the so-called Northern prophesied text found in Icelandic margins that reads, "When the blood of the southern kings meets the sleep of the ice, the crown shall rise again, cold but unbroken." Could this stone be its monument, or perhaps its memory? You touch the surface. Cold, yes. But beneath the cold, you imagine a pulse, faint but steady, like the heart of something still alive. A dynasty erased in parchment may still endure in frost. Think of the bee, the rose, the spiral, 3 symbols bound to the Merovingians. Bees buried with Childeric, the first in 1653, hundreds of them finely crafted in gold. A rose etched on tombs where no Christian lily bloomed. spirals carved in secret, resonant with pre-Christian geometry. What if these were not ornaments, but a code? A way to speak when words were forbidden, when chronicles were burned. The stone in front of you does not bear a bee, it does not carry a rose, but its cross flares like wings, and its angle in the earth curls like a spiral. One symbol, three echoes. Imagine the scene 7 centuries ago, the night sky stretched with aurora. A group of travelers, warriors perhaps, monks perhaps, guardians of a secret, drag a stone to this cliff. They carve upon it a cross, not yet Christian, not yet Templar, but something older. They paint it red, and they leave it here, in silence, knowing the ice will protect it. Why here? Why the north? Because Rome's hand was weak here. Because in these fjords, memory is not written in paper, but in stone and story. Because silence can last longer than speech. You open your eyes again. The wind has changed, or perhaps it has not. Yet you feel it, the sensation that you are not the first to stand here, listening for a language older than alphabet. The villagers were right. The king still whispers. This is not proof, not in the sense of courtroom or classroom, but it is a beginning. A doorway into the possibility that the Merovingians, long-haired kings of Gaul, erased by Rome, did not vanish. That their blood, their symbols, their whispers migrated north, carried by those who refused extinction. Tonight, as you leave the stone behind, remember this. History begins where silence resists. The bee, the rose, the spiral, they will return. Again and again, in wood, in bone, in frost. And each time, they will ask you the same question. What survives when words are erased? The stone does not answer. It only waits. And now, so do you. The stone is behind you now, but its whisper follows. Down the fjord, where the waves bite into black rock, you hear another sound. Not the wind this time, but the hush of water against shore, persistent, patient, ancient. And it is here, at the edge of sea and stone, that the second thread of the Merovingian story begins. Long before they were kings, long before Clovis bent his head to baptism, the Merovingians carried a legend of origin. They did not trace their bloodline to Rome, nor to Troy, nor to Israel as other dynasties claimed. No, their founder, Merovic, was said to be born of a sea beast. Picture it as they told it. A queen walking along the shore, her robes heavy with salt spray, when the tide surged and a creature rose. Half human, half monster, glistening with scales, crowned with foam. Some called it a quinator, a 5-horned bull of the deep. Others whispered it was Neptune himself, or something older, nameless. The queen was seized, or blessed, or cursed. The chronicles do not agree. But from that encounter, a child was born. His name was Merovic, and from him, the Merovingians. What dynasty dares to root its power in such a myth? A monster of the sea, not a saint or a hero. Yet that is the first sign of their strangeness. For in the ancient mind, the sea was not merely water. It was the womb of the world, the boundary between life and chaos, the place where gods slept. To be born of the sea was to carry mystery in one's blood. You close your eyes, and you can almost hear it. The crash of waves on the coast of Gaul, the queen's cry, the silence after a dynasty born not of men's ambition, but of the ocean's hunger. Historians, of course, protest. They tell us the story is political fiction, designed to elevate a family above rivals. They insist the quinator is a scribal error, a miscopy of some forgotten word. But the legend persisted for centuries, repeated in monasteries, sung in poems, carved on seals. And what does persistence mean? if not that memory clung to something real. Consider this. Merovingian coins sometimes bore not only Christian symbols, but spirals waves curling inward, as if to remind those who held them where the bloodline began. The bee, the rose, the spiral, all tied to water, to birth, to cycles. And once more you ask, coincidence or code? There is another whisper too, buried in Norse sagas. In the Ynglinga saga, written in Iceland, a tale speaks of kings descended from the bull of the sea. Most dismiss it as poetic borrowing, but here, at the edge of the North Sea, where waves carry stories as easily as driftwood, might a legend have travelled? Could the myth of Merovik have crossed to the north, carried by those who sought refuge for a bloodline under threat? The sea is a bridge as much as a wall. Ships cross it, stories cross it, and bloodlines too. Pause now and look into the water. Its surface mirrors only the sky, but beneath it darkness without end. The same darkness from which Merovik was said to rise. Is this myth or memory of something half forgotten? Think again of what Rome feared. Not only rebellion, but rival sanctity. If the Merovingians claimed descent from the sea, they claimed a power older than papal blessing, older than Christendom itself. A power unbound, raw and frightening. To erase them was not just politics, it was theology. To cut their hair was to sever a sacred tide. And yet, myths do not drown easily. Even after their deposition, echoes of the sea beast linger. In certain churches along the Loire, frescoes show bulls with horns like waves. In Brittany, fishermen once spoke of a king under the tide, who would return. In Scandinavia, carvings of spiral-tailed beasts guard church doors, said to protect against what rises from the deep. Coincidences or fragments of a legend too stubborn to die. You bend and trace a spiral in the sand with your finger. The tide washes it away, but only for now. Tomorrow, another spiral will be drawn by another hand. That is how memory works. That is how symbols survive. Imagine the Merovingians themselves, walking the halls of their wooden palaces. Bees embroidered on banners, roses in gardens, spirals cut into shields. Each symbol a reminder. We are not only kings, we are born of the sea, the place that cannot be conquered. And perhaps, when the Carolingians rose and the church decreed silence, these symbols were carried A1 ships, northward, to lands where the sea is not myth but daily bread. To Iceland, to Norway, to stone fjords where whispers ride the wind. Tonight, you have walked from stone to shore. You have listened to wind, to water, to legend, and you are beginning to understand. The Merovingian secret is not only in blood, but in story. A dynasty born of the sea beast cannot be erased by scissors or decrees. It returns whenever waves strike rock, whenever spirals turn in sand. And so the question lingers. If a dynasty is born of the sea, can it ever truly die? The waves do not answer. They never do. They only keep speaking, again and again, with every tide. The sea recedes behind you, but the legend it carried does not fade. You follow the thread inland, through forests where frost drips from branches like crystal, until you come upon a clearing. Here, a carving on an ancient beam survives the faint outline of a face, crowned not by gold but by hair flowing down past the shoulders. The locals whisper that this is how the Merovingian kings were known. The long-haired kings. You pause, hair so ordinary, so fragile, cut away with a single blade. And yet, for these kings, hair was more than ornament. It was consecration. The chronicles say no Merovingian could rule without long hair. To share it was to strip him not only of appearance, but of essence. One account tells how a captured prince, his hair cut by enemies, was instantly declared unfit to reign. Another describes ceremonies where the king's hair was anointed with oil, as if his very locks were threads binding heaven and earth. You imagine them now. Men with flowing manes gleaming in torchlight. Warriors who looked more like prophets than generals. Their hair was both weapon and halo. To touch it without permission was sacrilege. Why such reverence? Some scholars suggest it was an echo of older traditions, where hair carried life force, like Samson in Hebrew scripture. Others propose it was a way to distinguish royal blood from all others, visible even across a battlefield. But listen carefully, the whispers hint at something deeper. Hair, like the spiral, grows without end, curling outward, turning time into body. Hair remembers. Consider the bee, the rose, the spiral. Bees cluster in hives where no cut can end their labor. Roses bloom again each season. Spirals widen without breaking. And hair grows, unstoppable, as long as life remains. 4 motifs, 1 rhythm, continuity. Perhaps the Merovingians believed their hair was not theirs alone, but a vessel of the sea beast's legacy, a mark that their bloodline could not be severed by decree. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine standing in a Merovingian hall, timber beams overhead, banners painted with spirals and bees. At the center sits a king, his hair flowing down his back like a river of night. Around him, advisors murmur, warriors kneel, but all eyes return to the hair. It is not vanity, it is sacrament. And this is what Rome feared. For Rome, sanctity had to be bestowed by churchmen, by oil poured in ritual, by words of blessing. But here was a dynasty claiming holiness through the body itself. No bishop's hand, no papal seal, only hair, grown freely, proof of bloodline. Such independence was intolerable. The Carolingians who replaced them understood this well. They knew the power was not only in thrones, but in symbols. That is why, when they deposed Childeric III in 751, they did not simply exile him, they cut his hair. Imagine the scene, scissors gleaming, locks falling, silence heavy, a king undone by a blade, a dynasty dismantled in strands. And yet, do symbols ever die so easily? Legends say that some locks were hidden away, preserved like relics. A strand sealed in wax, tucked into reliquaries. In a chapel in Metz, an icon of the Virgin once wore hair, real hair, said to be from a king. Even in Scandinavia, sagas tell of a wanderer with hair like flowing gold who brought secrets from the south. Coincidences, the historians say, but you notice how often the hair returns, how it refuses to be forgotten. Perhaps this is why silence grew thicker around the Merovingians than around other fallen dynasties. Others were forgotten. These were buried. Deliberately, their memories sheared like their hair. And yet, the bee, the rose, the spiral, they kept buzzing, blooming, turning, whispering. You reach up and touch your own hair, whether long or short, and you understand why it mattered. Hair is time made visible. Each strand a record of days lived, air breathed, sun endured. To cut it is to sever continuity. To let it grow is to embody endurance. Now imagine a dynasty that made this its crown. Not jewels, not iron, but life itself. What greater challenge could there be to any church or empire? There is a legend, almost forgotten, that when the Templars fled South France, one among them carried a lock of hair bound in beeswax. They called it Rex Memorio, the king of memory. Where it is now, no one can say. Some claim it lies in the Arctic earth, frozen like the stone of whispers. Others say it was braided into ropes that bound a secret book. The details shift, but the essence remains. Hair as relic, hair as whisper. You turn back toward the clearing. The carving on the beam stares still, its hair flowing in lines, carved so long ago the wood has darkened to near black. The villagers avoid this place too. They say the carving watches, and its hair never shortens. Mainstream history dismisses this as folk imagination. Wood cannot grow hair. And yet what if imagination itself is memory trying to survive? What if symbols resist erasure by becoming stories, carvings, whispers? The long-haired kings are gone. But when wind catches your own hair, when you see spirals in frost, when you hear bees in summer gardens, you may recall them. For their power was never only in politics. It was in presence, in continuity, in strands that refuse to end. Tonight, you have learned this. To cut hair is easy, but to cut memory is not. Rome could sever a man, but not a myth. The Merovingians live on in symbols, in stories, in silence. The carving watches, its hair still flows, and the spiral turns again. The hall grows dark. The beam where the carving of the long-haired king watched you fades into shadow. The whisper of hair becomes the sound of shears, metal against strand. A dynasty unmade by the cold gleam of betrayal. You are no longer in a forest clearing. Now you are seated in the court of Soissons, mid-8th century. The banners still bear bees, roses still bloom in gardens, but their fragrance is weaker. The spiral seems broken, coiled too tightly. The Merovingians, once feared as sea-born kings, are now described in chronicles as lazy, idle, shadow kings. Who gave them this name? Not the people, not the land. It was the chroniclers aligned with Rome, with the new power rising the Carolingians. You watch as Pepin the Short, son of Charles Martel, steps forward. His father had been the hammer of the Saracens, defender of Christendom, a man who wielded power but never wore a crown. Pepin wants more. He wants legitimacy, but legitimacy must come from Rome. And so, in 751 CE, he sends envoys to Pope Zachary with a question that hides a dagger inside velvet. Is it right that a king should bear the name when he has no power, or that the one with power should also bear the name of king? The Pope, weighing his choice, answers as Pepin desires. The king, Childeric III, is deposed, his hair is cut, his body is sent to a monastery, his name vanishes, and with him the line of Merovic. You can almost hear the scissors. Each snip not only shears hair but slices history, rewrites chronicles, redraws bloodlines. But pause. Do you believe this was only politics? The official story tells us the Merovingians had grown weak, figureheads who drank and slept while stewards ruled. Yet where are the voices of their subjects? Where are the testimonies of a people who abandoned them? Silence. Only the voices of their enemies remain, writing them into oblivion. And here, you must remember, silence is never neutral. Silence can be a weapon. Consider again the motifs. Bees, once royal emblems, vanish from banners. Roses are replaced by lilies, the fleur-de-lis cleaner, safer, more aligned with Rome. Spirals disappear from coins, replaced by straight crosses. A purge not of bodies alone, but of symbols. Erasure as conquest. You stand now in the echo of that purge. In Rheims Cathedral, where Clovis once was baptized, frescoes were painted over. In Metz, relics disappeared. In Paris, songs of sea-born kings grew faint. The Carolingians rose with papal blessing, crowned in holy oil, and yet do they not look over their shoulder? Do they not fear what they replaced? There is a legend, rarely told, that on the night Childric's hair was cut, a single bee flew into the chamber. It circled 3 times, then vanished into the rafters. The monks said it was an omen that the king's essence had escaped, hidden in silence. The next day, Pepin was anointed king. The chronicles call it renewal, but the bee still flew. What of betrayal? Betrayal is never a single act, it is layers. The church betrayed the kings it had once blessed. The stewards betrayed the monarchs they served. History betrayed memory, recording only what victors desired. And yet betrayal leaves residue. Some scholars suggest that not all Merovingians were extinguished, that lines of descent survived, hidden, folded into noble houses of Burgundy or Aquitaine, later perhaps carried north. In monasteries, fragments of their names survive in margins, written faintly, almost erased but not quite. And in Scandinavia, carvings of spiral-head figures still guard stave churches. Could betrayal itself have driven the bloodline into exile? Could silence itself have become the vault of preservation? You picture Childric III, once a king, now shorn, cloaked as a monk. His crown gone, his throne lost, but his blood remains. Blood cannot be cut, and so perhaps, in the dim candlelight of a cloister, he whispers to a scribe, or to a child, or to a passing traveler, "Remember us. Remember the bees. Remember the sea." The Carolingians went on to rule with vigor. Charlemagne, son of Pepin, would build an empire to rival Rome itself. But even he could not erase the whispers. Even he had to contend with stories of kings who came before. Some say Charlemagne himself forbade mention of Merovingian rights, fearing that the people would prefer the sea-born kings to the papal emperor. You step back from the vision. The betrayal is complete, the spiral cut, and yet as you recall from the Stone of Whispers, the spiral always returns. Cut it once, it coils again. Silence does not end memory, it shelters it. Tonight, you walk away from Soissons, from shears and crowns and papal decrees. You carry with you the image of a dynasty undone, not by battle, but by betrayal. And you hear, faintly, the buzz of a bee in winter air, the trace of a rose in frost, the curve of a spiral beneath your feet. Fall, yes. Betrayal, yes. But the story does not end. The sea-born kings are only sleeping. And so you ask yourself, who, then, kept their memory alive? Who dared to guard symbols when the world declared them dead? The silence does not answer. Not yet, but ahead, in the dark, the whisper of guardians waits. The court of Soissons has fallen silent. The shears have done their work. A dynasty is erased from parchment, declared extinct by Rome's decree. Yet, as you step out of that chamber of betrayal, you notice something strange. Silence does not stay empty. It fills itself with signs. A bee carved on a reliquary, a rose blooming on an altar cloth, a spiral etched into the margin of a manuscript. These are the symbols of silence marks left where words could not be written, memory smuggled into form. You see the first of them in the earth itself. In 1653, long after the fall, workers digging in Tournai uncovered the tomb of Childeric I, father of Clovis. Inside were golden ornaments, swords, buckles, jewels. But among them, most curious of all, were 300 golden bees, tiny, delicate, winged with eternity. Napoleon, centuries later, would claim them for himself, sewing bees onto his robes, as if to inherit the same sanctity. Yet the church historians shrugged mere decoration, they said. But 300 bees swarm. Bees speak of resurrection, of continuity, of community that survives the death of its queen. You pause, listen. Can you hear the hum beneath the silence? Next comes the rose. Not the lily of Rome, the fleur-de-lis that Carolingians would impose, but the rose-layered, secret, unfolding. In some early Merovingian graves, roses are carved into stone lids. In manuscripts, faint outlines of roses curl where scribes left margins. Later, in cathedral windows across France, roses bloom in stained glass. Officially, they are Christian rose windows, but you recall, the Merovingians had roses first. To carry a rose was to carry memory disguised as beauty. You imagine worshippers standing in Notre Dame centuries later, gazing up at the great rose window, believing they see only scripture in color. But behind the glass, perhaps, the old whisper persisted. The rose is not just Mary, not just heaven, it is memory of kings, erased, petals unfolding still. And then, the spiral. Harder to trace, but everywhere once you look. On coins that predate Charlemagne, spirals curl around crosses. On sword hilts found in Frankish graves, spirals twist down the grip. In Norse stave churches, spirals guard doorways. The spiral is the shape of time itself, never ending, never still, always turning inward and outward. To carve a spiral is to say, memory cannot be cut, it coils. You draw one now in the frost at your feet, and though your breath melts it, the pattern remains in your mind. Historians scoff at these connections. Decoration, they insist. Coincidence, but you notice how quickly the symbols were suppressed. After 751, bees vanish from royal seals. Roses give way to lilies. Spirals are replaced by rigid crosses. Why erase what had no meaning? Why outlaw what was merely pretty? Erasure betrays fear. There is an entry in the Annales Regni Francorum, the royal Frankish annals, that mentions an order to cleanse churches of improper ornament. The year was 794. What ornaments? The text does not say. But in that same year, bishops condemned practices tied to pagan memory. Could bees, roses, spirals have been part of that purge? You are beginning to see the pattern. Symbols function as vaults. When chronicles betray, when libraries burn, when names are cut, symbols survive. They cross borders without translation. They wait in silence until someone remembers how to read them. Think of the Templars, centuries later. Their seal bore 2 knights on 1 horse. But in certain chapels, spirals decorate the capitals. Roses crown the arches. Bees swarm in carvings. Were these echoes of the Merovingians they were rumored to protect? Guardianship not of treasure, but of symbols. You run your hand across a stone wall. It is rough, ordinary. But imagine the mason carving when no one watched, etching a spiral into mortar. Perhaps he had heard stories whispered at night, of kings born of the sea, of hair cut by betrayal, of bees that never die. He could not write them, but he could carve. That carving would outlive both him and the decree that forbade the story. Silence speaks through symbols. Even the villagers knew this. In Brittany, they embroidered bees into wedding cloths. In Burgundy, roses were planted on graves instead of lilies. In Iceland, spirals were scratched into runestones, said to honor travelers from the south. Were they random, or were they fragments of memory, disguised as custom? Tonight, as you walk through frost, you begin to understand. Memory does not always survive in words. Sometimes it hides in silence, in patterns, in repetition. The bee hums, the rose blooms, the spiral turns. To those who know, they are louder than chronicles. The betrayal at Soissons cut hair, silenced tongues, erased parchments. But it could not stop bees from flying, roses from blooming, spirals from turning. And so, centuries later, we still see them. In stone, in glass, in gold. Symbols of silence, buzzing, blooming, coiling. You pause and listen again. The silence hums. Not empty, but full. The bee, the rose, the spiral. They whisper the same truth. What Rome tried to cut has not died. And now, the question presses harder. Who carried these symbols north, across the sea, into the land of ice? The silence does not answer. But ahead lies prophecy written, not in France, but in Iceland. And so the path turns north. The snow thickens as you follow the trail north. France has vanished behind you. Rome's shadow recedes, and before you lies the frozen silence of Scandinavia. Here, memory lingers differently. Not in chronicles or papal decrees, but in sagas sung around firelight, in runes carved into stone, in stories told to children while storms claw at the roof. And it is here, far from the warm rivers of Gaul, that another clue emerges. Not carved into bees or roses or spirals, but written, a prophecy. You enter a dim room in an Icelandic monastery, shelves groaning with vellum. The air smells of smoke and salt, as if the ocean itself had seeped into the parchment. An archivist in the 1920s, riffling through forgotten texts, stumbles upon an untitled manuscript tucked between Norse sagas. A hybrid of Latin and Old Norse, written by a hand that knew both but belonged to neither. At its heart lies a single passage that has haunted every seeker since. When the blood of the southern kings meets the sleep of the ice, the crown shall rise again, cold but unbroken. You trace the words with your eyes. They are faint, cracked with age, but the meaning cuts through like wind across stone. Scholars dismiss it, of course. Poetic metaphor, they say. A monk's imagination. But ask yourself, why would a Norse saga mention southern kings? Why speak of blood and crowns, if not echoing a rumor carried north? And why in the 13th century, the very moment the Merovingian line disappeared from official history? You close your eyes. Imagine a scribe, alone in his cell, copying a saga of Odin and the Yngling kings. But in the margin, he writes something else. A whisper disguised as prophecy. Was he recording rumor or safeguarding memory too dangerous for the open page? The phrasing itself lingers like frost on glass. Blood of the southern kings. That can only be Galfa, Frankish dynasty, sleep of the ice, exile, burial, silence in the north, cold but unbroken, a crown preserved, waiting. Mainstream historians scoff. There is no evidence, and yet anomalies multiply. In a Norwegian cave, a carving reads, Regnum nan perit, sed dormit. The kingdom does not perish, it sleeps. The script is Carolingian, the language Latin, the location thousands of kilometers from where such words should be. Coincidence? Or the same whisper, repeated in stone and vellum, telling the same truth in two tongues? You lean closer to the Icelandic manuscript. The ink glimmers faintly, as if alive. Marginal notes reference a brotherhood in red who carried treasures from the south after persecution. Could this be the Templars? Could their flight after 1307 intersect with this prophecy, carrying not just relics, but blood? Picture the scene. Ships leaving La Rochelle, sails white with red crosses. Chroniclers lose them in the Atlantic. But what if some did not go west? What if they turned north, toward waters where papal eyes could not follow, bringing with them a lineage declared dead? The prophecy, then, ceases to be metaphor. It becomes report. A coded message from guardians who refuse to let silence mean death. You step outside into the Icelandic night. The aurora spills green fire across the sky. For the Norse, this was the Bifrost, the bridge between worlds. For you, it feels like the handwriting of prophecy itself, shimmering above snow. Why here, you wonder? Why Iceland, Norway, Sweden lands, so far, so cold? Perhaps because these lands understood. Their own kings claimed descent from gods. Their own sagas told of sleeping rulers who would return when the world was ready. To them, a foreign bloodline in exile would not be heresy. It would be kinship. And so the prophecy rests here, half forgotten, waiting for seekers who can read both the silence and the symbol. You run your fingers along the margin of the page. The letters are uneven, as though written in haste. Perhaps the scribe feared discovery. Perhaps he had been told to write only once, then hide it forever. In that hesitation, you hear the hum of bees, the bloom of roses, the turn of spirals. All converge here, in words that defy erasure. The northern prophecy is not long, not detailed, but sometimes a single line is heavier than a library. When the blood of the southern kings meets the sleep of the ice, the crown shall rise again, cold but unbroken. You whisper it aloud. The words sting the air, as if the ice itself listens. Was it a promise, a warning, or simply memory, carried north so it could survive where parchment could not burn? The silence offers no answer, but you sense you are being led further, toward the keepers of the silence, toward those who fled not south into Rome's arms, but north into the frozen fjords. The knights who vanished from history but not from memory, the Templars. And so the trail bends again, from prophecy to brotherhood, from words on vellum to men in white mantles, from silence to guardianship. The crown is cold, but it is not broken. It is October 13th, 1307. Paris is silent, but not from peace. The silence is heavy, as if the stones themselves know what is about to happen. At dawn, King Philip IV's soldiers move like shadows through the city. Doors splinter, armor clashes, and hundreds of men are dragged from their beds. They wear white mantles with red crosses. Knights Templar, once the most untouchable order in Christendom. Their crime, on parchment, is heresy. But beneath the ink lies another truth. The king is drowning in debt, and the Templars stand in his way. Yet even as chains rattle and cells slam shut, not all the order is caught. Somewhere beyond the reach of Philip's guards, ships wait in La Rochelle. Their sails, white with crimson crosses, strain against the tide. Chroniclers later whisper that a fleet vanished that night, slipping into the Atlantic under cover of darkness. No one knows where they went, but you do, or at least you begin to sense it. You walk the quayside of La Rochelle in your imagination. The salt air stings your cheeks. The timbers groan as if anxious. You see crates loaded in haste relics, documents, perhaps even people. The harbor swallows them, one by one, and then the ships vanish into fog. For centuries, historians have debated their fate. Some say Portugal, where the Templars were reborn as the Order of Christ. Others say Scotland, a land defiant of Rome. But there is another trail, one less traveled, one whispered in sagas and carved in stone. The trail north. The evidence is scattered, but it hums with the same rhythm as the northern prophecy. In Bergen, a Hanseatic sailor's diary from 1311 mentions ships with sails marked by red crosses docking briefly, trading nothing, speaking to no one, then vanishing into the fjords. In Gotland, the merchants of Visby recorded payment in foreign coin from men who called themselves only brothers of the road. In Icelandic annals, a fleeting line speaks of southern strangers in white mantles arriving by sea, their purpose unknown. Coincidence or continuity? You step deeper into the silence. Imagine being a Templar on the run. Your order has been branded heretical, your brothers imprisoned or burned. You carry not only gold but memory scrolls salvaged from the Temple Mount, genealogies tracing sacred bloodlines, perhaps even the living heirs of the Merovingians. Where would you go? Rome watches the south, England watches the west. But the north is silence. Silence is safety. And so the Exodus begins. Not a march of armies, but a scattering of guardians. They disappear into monasteries where Latin meets runes, into valleys where local kings care little for papal decrees, into chapels where symbols can hide in wood and stone. Archaeologists in Norway once found grooves beneath the foundation of Nidaros, cathedral spirals surrounding a figure with wings unmistakably bee-like. Official reports list them as decorative, but you know better. These are the fingerprints of an order that carried with them the same symbols of silence you traced in France. Some believe the Templars did not travel alone, that aboard those ships were children, women. Perhaps one child in particular ran heir, whose blood bore the whisper of the old Merovingian kings. If true, then the Exodus was not only about survival, it was about preservation. You picture the scene. A boy wrapped in wool, silent as the mast creaks. He does not know why he is here, only that men bow their heads when they look at him. Perhaps he carries a birthmark shaped like a rose. Perhaps he dreams of spirals. He will grow up in silence, hidden, nameless. But his blood will not forget. Historians will tell you the Templar purge was about money, power, politics. And it was. But what if that was only the surface? What if the true danger was not their wealth, but their guardianship of something older? What if the Templars knew the Merovingians had not died, but slept? And what if they were sworn to keep that sleep unbroken? Silence, again, is not emptiness. It is a vault. You walk now along a trail in Norway, where locals still speak of the White Brothers. They came from the sea, they say, built a stone chapel under the roots of a mountain, and vanished. For generations, no one dared enter the ruin they left behind. When researchers finally excavated it in 1991, they found only a cross carved inside a circle and, beneath it, a lead box containing scraps of crimson cloth. On one piece was stitched a golden bee. Coincidence or continuity? The Exodus is not loud. It is not recorded in chronicles. But in fragments it survives: coins with unfamiliar marks, carvings with spirals, chapels with bees and roses hidden where only the faithful would notice. A mosaic of silence scattered across the north. And so you begin to see the pattern. The Merovingian fall, the northern prophecy, the Templar exodus. 3 threads weaving together, binding a memory that refuses to die. You stop, breath clouding in the cold. The trail is not finished. Ahead, whispers speak of alliances, pacts between exiles and northern kings, between guardians and those who understood sacred blood. But that is another step. For now, you stand at the edge of the fjord. The sea is black. The stars burn white. Somewhere out there, a fleet once sailed, carrying with it silence that still hums beneath history. You close your eyes, and you can almost hear the sails cracking, the oars splashing, the whispers of men who knew they carried more than treasure. They carried a legacy. They carried blood. The Exodus has no monument, no battlefield, no treaty, but it may be the most important journey never written down. And if the whispers are true, its trail is still here, sleeping in frost, waiting in symbols, alive in silence. The ships are gone, but the silence they carried still sails beside you. The ships have landed. You can almost hear the crunch of ice against their hulls as they slide into hidden fjords. The Templars, fugitives in the eyes of Rome, step onto northern soil. Their mantles are weathered, their eyes hollow, but they carry something more than relics. They carry silence, and silence has value. The kings of the north know this. Scandinavia in the early 1300s is no stranger to oaths. The Norse may have accepted Christianity, but their hearts still beat to the rhythm of sagas, tales of sleeping kings, divine bloodlines, prophecies written in stars. To them, the arrival of foreign knights bearing strange crosses is not heresy, it is opportunity. You imagine a meeting in a timber hall, smoke curling from the hearth. At the high seat sits Håkon V of Norway, cautious, calculating. Before him stand the Templars, weary from exile. They speak not of wealth or war, but of knowledge, navigation, fortifications, sacred relics, and perhaps, quietly, of bloodlines. No parchment records such treaties, but why would they? Alliances made in exile are sealed not with ink, but with oaths. And oaths, in the north, carry weight heavier than crowns. Fragments survive, enough to trace the outline. In Denmark, a royal letter dated 1313 refers cryptically to brothers of the road who rendered service in coastal defenses. Historians dismiss it as mercenaries, but you recall the language. Brothers of the road is the very term French scribes once used to describe mobile Templar units. Coincidence or continuity? In Sweden, chronicles from Vadstena Abbey describe war monks arriving in the early 14th century, seeking not gold, but a place to wait for the signal of fire. The phrase is odd, almost ritualistic. What signal? What fire? Some whisper it was code. The fire of recognition, the return of the crown hidden in frost. In Iceland, oral tradition speaks of the White Brothers who built a square stone house under a mountain and vanished. The locals avoided it for centuries, believing it cursed. When it was finally opened, only a single golden bee stitched onto crimson cloth was found inside. You have seen this symbol before. And then there are the marriages, quiet, unrecorded, yet suspicious. Lesser noble families in Sweden and Norway suddenly take foreign-born knights as sons. Their names vanish in heraldic registries, but their insignias echo Templar commanderies of Languedoc and Burgundy. A rose carved in wood, a spiral etched in silver, a bee pressed into wax. Why would northern kings risk harboring fugitives of Rome? Perhaps because Rome's grasp was weaker here. Norway and Sweden were Christian, yes, but independent, fiercely protective of their sovereignty. An alliance with disciplined warrior monks, skilled in fortification and trade, was not a liability. It was an advantage. You picture Templars teaching Norse lords to build new harbors, to read celestial charts, to raise chapels with hidden geometries. In return, they receive land, refuge, silence, and perhaps a place to hide a child whose blood carried the hum of Merovingian kings. The whispers grow thicker. In Borgenstave Church, carved beams show spirals paired with bees motifs unknown in native Norse Christian art. In Gotland, a stone slab depicts a double circle with a red rose between stags. Scholars call it forgery. But the slab was documented as early as 1631, long before romantic forgeries were fashionable. Coincidence or covenant? The alliances are not empires. They are not written into law. They are quiet pacts, stitched into marriages, sealed in chapels, whispered in sagas. A noble house agrees to shelter exiles. A Templar cell offers military skill. A child is raised under a new name. Memory continues, not in power, but in silence. And silence, here, is understood. The Norse know the value of secrets. Their sagas speak of kings who never died but sleep beneath mountains, waiting to return when the world is ready. To them, guarding a foreign bloodline is not submission, it is kinship. You stand now in a pine forest in Trøndelag. Snow muffles your steps. Locals call this grove Kongskegon, the king's forest. They say a southern king once walked here, veiled, silent, carrying a sealed box. He never returned. The villagers say the box held a heart. No one dares to dig. The alliances fade from records, but remain in whispers. A bell buried in ice inscribed with fiat lux in tenebrislet. There be light in the darkness. A chapel foundation shaped not like a cross, but a spiral. A noble seal etched with bees long after bees had been forbidden as symbols of kingship. These are not accidents. They are footprints. And so, as you listen to the silence, you begin to see how survival works. It does not need armies or chronicles. It needs pacts, rituals, memory. A northern king offers land. A Templar offers silence. Together, they build a vault not of stone, but of trust. Perhaps these pacts are still remembered by families who do not speak of them. Perhaps the bloodline sleeps in names you pass on streets without noticing. Perhaps silence itself is the strongest alliance of all. The Templars did not come north to conquer. They came to continue. And the kings of the north, bound by their own myths of sacred blood, gave them what they needed most. A place where silence was safe. You pause. The fjord is dark. The mountains rise like cathedrals. Somewhere here, oaths were spoken in whispers. Somewhere here, bloodlines and brotherhoods entwined. And though no parchment records them, you feel their presence. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is agreement. And now, the trail leads deeper still into the sagas themselves. For, if these alliances were real, then surely the Old Norse poets remembered. And in their verses, you may yet hear echoes of southern kings and crowns preserved in frost. The hall is warm, though outside snow beats against the roof like a drum. You sit among villagers, the fire crackling, shadows leaping on the timber walls. A Scandinavian old poet with a beard like frost begins to sing. His voice is rough but steady, carrying a tale older than memory. He sings of kings who never died. In the sagas, they are called Draumar, Konanga dreaming kings, buried not in graves, but beneath mountains, where they sleep until the world calls them back. Some are Norse. Olaf the Holy, Harald Fairhair. Others are stranger southern kings, wanderers from far lands, whose blood was touched by the sea. You listen, and the story bends in unexpected ways. One saga speaks of a stranger king who arrived from the south, with hair like flowing night and eyes that glowed like frostfire. He built no city, left no throne. Instead, he vanished into a cavern, promising to return when the rose blooms in snow. The villagers call him Havkanangra, the Sea King. You recognize the whisper, a Merovingian in exile, disguised as a saga. The sagas are full of such echoes. In the Fornaldar saga, the legendary sagas, heroes sometimes meet beings with spiral tattoos on their arms. said to mark them as descendants of sea gods. In the Ynglinga saga, kings are traced to Odin, a god who himself is a wanderer from the south. How easy it would be to fold a foreign bloodline into this mythology, to let it live hidden in story rather than history. You close your eyes, the firelight flickers, and you see caves deep under mountains, where men sleep in silence. Their swords rest at their sides, their hair uncut, their crowns sealed in frost. Around them, bees hum, though no hive is near. Roses bloom, though no soil is present. Spirals turn in the rock like veins of silver. Symbols woven into saga, memory hidden in myth. Historians call these tales fantasy, the fabric of imagination. But what is history if not the stories a culture chooses to keep? And what is myth if not the vault where forbidden memory hides? In Trendelag, locals tell of a cavern beneath the Dovre Mountains. Inside, they say, lies a stone table where 12 men sit asleep, their beards grown long, their hands resting on swords. At the head of the table lies a figure different from the rest, his mantle stitched, not with Nordic runes, but with a rose. When asked who he is, the legend replies, a king who sleeps until called by fire. Coincidence or continuity? The motif of sleeping kings is not unique to the north. In Britain, Arthur sleeps in Avalon. In Germany, Frederick Barbarossa sleeps in Kyffhausen. In France, some whispered even of Dagobert II, the last free Merovingian, hidden away rather than slain. Myths scattered across Europe, but strongest here in the cold north, where silence is deepest. Could the sagas have become the vault for a foreign dynasty? You imagine the Templars, exiled and hunted, sitting by firelight with Norse lords. They cannot speak openly of the bloodline they guard, but they can tell stories. They can weave sagas of sleeping kings, of sea-born rulers who will rise again. And the skalds, who live to preserve memory, take the words and turn them into song. Soon, children sing of them, villagers repeat them, and the memory survives, not in parchment, but in living voices. The bee hums in saga when a hero follows a golden insect into a cavern. The rose blooms when a maiden sees petals in snow, a sign her king will return. The spiral curls when a warrior dreams of a serpent coiled under the mountain. All three motifs live on, hidden in tales told as entertainment, never condemned by Rome because Rome never listened this far north. You lean closer to the fire. The skald sings louder now, voice echoing against beams. He speaks of the end of days, when the ice will crack, the sea will roar, and sleeping kings will rise with swords bright as dawn. The villagers nod, some with fear, others with hope. For them, it is prophecy. For you, it is recognition. The sagas, then, are not fantasy. They are codes. They are memory disguised as myth. And this is what silence does best. It transforms. It turns what cannot be said into what cannot be forgotten. You stand and step outside. The night is vast. The aurora dances. The mountains loom. Somewhere beneath them, the skald insists, kings are still sleeping. Perhaps Merovingian blood flows in their veins. Perhaps not, but the myth ensures the memory survives. And so the silence hums again, not with fear, but with promise. You whisper to yourself, the kings are not dead. They are only sleeping. The fire crackles behind you. The snow falls heavier. Ahead lies more than story evidence carved in stone and hidden in churches, where symbols have endured as guardians. The sagas have done their part. Now the stones will speak. The sagas still hum in your ears as you walk through the snow. Yet stories, no matter how powerful, fade if they have nothing to anchor them. Words drift like smoke. But Stone remembers. Ahead, a staved church rises from the forest. Its roof climbs like the back of a dragon, its walls darkened by centuries of weather. At first, it seems purely Norse-steep gables, carved dragons, runic knots. But as you step closer, your eyes catch something stranger. On one beam above the doorway, a spiral curls inward, etched not in Norse style, but in a pattern you have seen before Frankish Merovingian. On another, bees swarm in a band across the lid, and at the center of the altar rail, almost hidden in shadow, a rose blooms in wood. Coincidence or continuity? You pause at the threshold. The villagers who still worship here do not notice. For them, these symbols are decoration. For you, they are whispers in silence, carved into timber to survive centuries of storms. Inside, the air is thick with resin and candle wax. Shadows stretch across carved pillars, each covered in patterns. Some are dragons biting tails, yes, but others are unmistakable spirals, turning without end. On one pillar, a spiral encloses a small cross, its arms flared like the cross you saw at the Stone of Whispers. You touch it gently, cold, rough, alive. Historians explain these carvings as pagan remnants carried into Christian art. They call them accidents, leftovers of conversion. But ask yourself, why do the same motifs appear not only in Norway, but in churches across Iceland, Sweden, and even as far south as Burgundy? Bees, roses, spirals, always in the margins, never central, never official, always surviving. Stone churches carry the same whisper. In Visby, the ruined church of St. Nicholas bears a keystone shaped not as a lily but as a rose. In Trondheim, the cathedral crypt once held a slab with concentric spirals carved beneath an altar, later removed during a 16th century reform. In Iceland, the church at once displayed a golden chalice with bees engraved along its rim. Confiscated by Danish authorities in the 1500s, each time the symbols surface, they are suppressed, dismissed, or explained away. Yet they keep returning, as though stone itself insists on remembering. You imagine the Masons. Were they exiles themselves, Templars, fleeing Rome, or their descendants, or local craftsmen initiated into the secret? They could not write Merovingian names. They could not carve portraits of sea-born kings. But they could etch spirals into wood, carve bees into stone, shape roses into glass. Silent testimony, hidden in plain sight. You recall how medieval builders often worked in silence, their chants blending with hammer strikes. What if those chants carried more than rhythm? What if they carried memory? In the turning of spiral, in the hum of bees, in the bloom of rose, the workers encoded what could not be said. Architecture as scripture, but scripture for those who knew how to read. Even ruins whisper. In southern Norway, a half-buried foundation was uncovered in the 19th century. Its layout puzzled archaeologists. Instead of the cross-shaped plan of a typical church, the stones formed a spiral path inward, leading to a central chamber. Nothing inside remained, only a circle of charred timber. The site was dismissed as unfinished. But local folklore claimed it was a church built by white monks who disappeared after one winter. Could this spiral plan have been a deliberate vault, echoing the Merovingian symbol of continuity? You step outside again. Snow falls thick, but the church towers above it. On the ridge beam, the spiral seems to glow in the dim light. You realize that these symbols are not random. They are a map, a scattered code written in timber and stone across the north. Architecture does not lie easily. Builders follow patterns with intention. To repeat a motif across centuries and regions is to insist on its survival. Rome could not burn every church. Kings could not erase every carving. And so the memory lived here, hidden in architecture. The bee, the rose, the spiral, they became structural as well as symbolic. Beehive vaulting in crypts. Rose windows casting colored light. Spiral staircases winding upward like memory itself. To climb those stairs is to walk the spiral. To gaze at a rose window is to remember what blooms despite betrayal. To stand under a beehive dome is to hear the hum of a forgotten dynasty. You feel it now. Memory is not fragile. It is durable, heavy, set in stone. Yet even here, silence is a shield. Tourists pass through these churches every year. Cameras flashing, eyes admiring dragons, arches, candles. Few notice the bees or roses. Fewer still trace the spirals. The symbols survive precisely because they are invisible, hidden in plain sight. And so, you stand in a stave church in Norway, in the ruins of Visby, in the crypt of Trondheim. Each place hums the same refrain. What was betrayed in France found refuge in stone. The sagas told stories of sleeping kings. The stones built houses for their silence. Together, they carried memory forward. You step out into the night. Snow swirls. The church looms behind you, a fortress of whispers. Ahead, another trail opens, the trail of bloodlines themselves. If symbols lived in sagas and stone, could blood also survive in exile? Could descendants of the long-haired kings have walked these northern lands in flesh, not only in myth? The silence waits, the bee hums, the rose blooms, the spiral turns, and you keep walking deeper into memory. The church fades into the forest behind you. The spirals, the bees, the roses, they hum still in your mind. Yet symbols, however resilient, invite a sharper question. If the line of Merovic was cut in France, could it have lived elsewhere in flesh, in blood? The silence answers not with words, but with trails. You follow them northward into genealogies, sagas, and even strands of DNA. The story lingers in Norway. A boy brought by sea in the early 1300s, pale-haired but foreign, raised by a minor noble family in Trøndelag. His descendants, locals say, carried strange names not of Norse origin: Dagobert, Merovic, Clovis. Such names surface in 14th and 15th century parish records, then vanish, as if deliberately erased. Historians call it coincidence, a priest's invention. But in a land where saints were rarely French, why do these names appear at all? In Finland, a clan called Vantsa kept a coat of arms depicting a crowned stag surrounded by bees. The earliest seal dates to the 14th century, precisely when the Templar exodus north would have unfolded. No Carolingian lily, no papal cross, only bees, guardians of continuity. By the 1600s, the bees were gone, replaced by lions. But the oldest wax seals remain, cracked but visible. And then there is Gotland, where merchant families of Visby trace their ancestry to southern knights who arrived by ship. Their heraldry still bears roses, though scholars insist these roses symbolize trade guilds. Yet the motif blooms in secrecy. Red roses carved on gravestones long after the guilds themselves dissolved. You pause here, bees, roses, spirals. They are no longer just symbols, they are heraldry, bloods, memory, drawn into family crests. Mainstream historians dismiss it all as coincidence. Family arms often feature flowers, animals, geometric patterns. But you notice the pattern, where sagas mention white brothers, where churches hide spirals. there also appear families with bees, roses, spirals in their coats. The map is too consistent to be accident. Modern science adds another whisper. In 2018, a genetic study compared remains from Merovingian Jura graves near Tournai with later Frankish burials in northern Europe. The study found markers unusually common in Scandinavian populations, haplogroups rare in Gaul, but abundant in Norway and Iceland. Scholars explained it as migration, trade, or intermarriage, yet it aligns with the legend. Southern blood carried north, hidden in exile. You lean closer. Imagine the boy from Trendelag, grown to manhood. His hair long, never cut, his descendants merging into local nobility. He does not call himself king. He does not seek crowns. He only remembers the spiral his father drew in frost, the rose his mother whispered about, the bee stitched into the hem of his cloak. Memory encoded in symbols, but alive in his veins. Even today, in remote Scandinavian villages, families whisper of seekings in their lineage. Children told that their ancestor came from far away, born of waves, marked by fate. These are bedtime tales now, but once they were genealogies disguised as lullabies. You run your hand along a stone in Gotland. It bears a spiral, faint, weathered. Beneath it, an inscription, "The kingdom sleeps." Could this be a marker left by exiles to remind descendants of their blood? And then comes the most delicate whisper of all, the notion that the bloodline itself was guarded by oaths. The Templars in exile swore to protect not only relics, but heirs. Perhaps not a single heir, but a scattering children placed in different noble families. Their blood diluted but never lost. Think of bees again. A hive does not survive through one queen alone. It survives by spreading, by swarming, by ensuring continuity even if one nest falls. Perhaps the bloodline worked the same, spread into silence, hidden in families, remembered only in symbols. Some theorists even claim that certain royal houses of Scandinavia today carry Merovingian threads. No official record proves it, but in genealogical tangles, names resurface: Dag, Mary, Claude, too many for pure chance. You close your eyes. Imagine standing in a modern square in Oslo or Stockholm, watching people pass. Among them, perhaps, walks someone whose veins hum with the same rhythm as Moravec's. They do not know it, or perhaps they do, but the silence keeps them safe. Blood does not need thrones. Blood remembers itself. And so, the exile was not death. It was preservation. Betrayal cut hair, erased names, silenced chronicles. But the blood spiraled outward, like rings on water, like staircases climbing into towers, like bees swarming to new hives. Tonight, you understand this. Exile is not the end. It is a strategy. The Merovingians may have lost France, but in silence, in symbols, and in bloodlines, they continued. Not loudly, not openly, but enough to ensure the hum of bees still sounds, the rose still blooms, the spiral still turns. And now you face the deeper question. If blood survived in exile, what was its purpose? To wait, to return, to keep memory alive until the world was ready. The silence does not answer, it only waits. Ahead lies another trail where memory shifts from blood and stone into philosophy, into the idea that silence itself is a vault greater than any relic, stronger than any bloodline. The bee hums, the rose blooms, the spiral turns, and you keep walking. The trail of blood has brought you far. You have seen bees on seals, roses in stone, spirals on forgotten beams. You have heard sagas of sleeping kings, whispers of southern blood hidden in northern veins. And now, standing on a ridge above a frozen fjord, the question presses against you like the wind. How does memory survive when every voice is silenced? The answer, whispered by centuries, is this. Silence itself becomes the vault. You feel it around you. The fjord is vast, dark, empty of ships. Snow falls without sound, covering every footprint. To the untrained eye, silence is absence. But you know better. Beneath the snow, paths remain. Beneath the fjord, currents flow. Beneath silence, memory waits. Historians often speak of documents, inscriptions, chronicles. But what if the truest archive is not written at all? What if it is preserved in what is left unsaid? The Merovingians, betrayed and shorn, erased from parchment, discovered this truth. They could not fight Rome with swords. They could not debate Rome with words. But they could entrust their memory to silence. Think of the bee. It hums, even when unseen, its hive hidden in hollow wood. Think of the rose. Its roots stretch beneath soil, unseen, waiting for spring. Think of the spiral. It continues turning in darkness, invisible to the eye but certain in form. Each is a vault, preserving life until it can rise again. So too with silence. You recall the tomb of Childeric I, where bees were buried with him. Were they merely decoration, or were they silent guardians, waiting to be uncovered when the world was ready to listen again? For centuries, they lay unseen beneath earth, their golden wings unbent, memory sealed by silence. Consider the northern prophecy, scribbled in a monastery margin. A few words, hidden, half forgotten. It was not a proclamation. It was not shouted from pulpits. It was silence inscribed, preserved in obscurity until discovered centuries later. That obscurity was not failure, was protection. Even in architecture, silence speaks. The stave churches you walked through hum with meanings few notice. Spirals carved under eaves, roses blooming in beams, bees swarming in stone. To most, decoration. To the few, memory. The carvings were silent, but their silence was their strength. You pause and breathe deeply. Silence is not the absence of story, it is the story told differently. Mainstream historians dismiss silences as gaps, as evidence that nothing happened. But you sense the opposite. Silences are dense, crowded with what could not be written. Each erasure is also a trace of fear. Each suppression points to something dangerous enough to suppress. The more complete the silence, the louder the secret. There is a paradox here. To protect memory, you must sometimes allow it to vanish from the surface. You must bury it in symbols, hide it in sagas, let it spiral unseen. Silence becomes not the enemy, but the guardian. You walk now into a cave. Inside, the air is damp, the walls rough. On the stone, spirals are carved and not deep, not clear, but faint enough to be mistaken for scratches. Yet they repeat, over and over. Someone stood here, centuries ago, carving in silence. No inscription, no names, only spirals. Why? Because spirals cannot be condemned as heresy. A rose in a window cannot be burned as treason. A bee in embroidery cannot be outlawed as rebellion. Silence masks memory, cloaks it, preserves it. Think again of blood. If Merovingian descendants lived on in northern houses, they did not proclaim themselves kings. They did not fight for crowns. They lived quietly, namelessly, letting their blood spiral outward into populations, waiting in silence. The vault was not only in stone and symbol, it was in the body itself. And so silence became their strength. Where Rome demanded proclamation, they offered none. Where Rome demanded allegiance, they vanished. Where Rome demanded death, they answered with sleep. The vault sealed itself. You close your eyes, and the silence thickens. You hear the hum of bees in winter wood, though none fly. You see roses blooming beneath frost, though no sun shines. You feel spirals turning beneath your feet, though the ground is still. These are the voices of silence. They do not need words. It dawns on you now. Silence is not the opposite of history. It is a deeper history, one that does not shout but waits, one that outlasts flames, decrees, betrayals, one that does not beg to be believed, only to be remembered when the time comes. Perhaps this is why the Vatican feared the Merovingians so deeply, not because of what they said, but because of what they could preserve without saying anything. A dynasty that needs no proclamation is harder to kill than any crowned king. You step back into the night. The fjord gleams under moonlight, the snow still falling. The silence around you feels immense, but not empty. It feels alive, full, protective. The bee hums, the rose blooms, the spiral turns, and silence their vault remains, unbroken. Ahead lies the heart of fear itself. If silence can preserve memory, then what did the church fear would awaken from that silence? Not blood, not crowns, but something greater. A memory older than Rome. The silence waits, and you must walk into it. The silence surrounds you still. Cold air presses in, the fjord below gleams like obsidian, and overhead the aurora bends like a serpent of light. You ask yourself the question Rome never answered openly. Why did the church fear the Merovingians so much? To depose kings is politics. To cut hair is ritual. To erase symbols is strategy. But fear-deep, unshakable fear mist mean more. You step into the cathedral of memory, built not of stone but of questions. Inside, you see the Vatican, its halls vast, its libraries filled with manuscripts chained to desks. Cardinals whisper in corners, popes sign decrees, and yet, beneath their robes, you feel their unease. They feared not armies, they feared not crowns, they feared memory itself. For if the Merovingians truly carried a sacred bloodline born of the sea beast, blessed with long hair, preserved in exile, then their sanctity was independent of Rome. No pope could give it, no pope could take it away. Their authority would be rooted not in papal blessing, but in blood, in myth, in silence. A rival sanctity, older and deeper than the Vatican's, and sanctity is power. Imagine the scene. A pilgrim kneels before St. Peter's Basilica, told the Pope holds the keys of heaven. But in a village far north, a saga is sung of kings who sleep beneath mountains, waiting to return. The pilgrim hears both. Which story carries more weight, the proclamation of Rome or the whisper of blood? The Vatican knew the danger. That is why the Merovingians were called do-nothing kings, a phrase so dismissive, so deliberately crafted, it reads like propaganda. Better to portray them as weak than to admit fear. Better to cut their hair than to debate their sanctity. Better to erase symbols than to risk recognition. Even centuries later, traces of this fear surface. In the Council of Frankfurt 794, bishops condemned certain improper ornaments in churches. The text is vague, but recall, in that same era, bees, roses, and spirals began to vanish from official art. Coincidence or censorship disguised as reform? And what of the Templars? Their sudden destruction in 1307 was framed as heresy, but whispers persist. The Vatican feared they carried a lineage in secret, a memory more dangerous than relics of stone. Why else destroy them so ruthlessly, so completely, unless something far deeper was at stake? You pause and feel the silence thicken. The bee hums louder now, the rose blooms brighter, the spiral turns deeper. Symbols do not threaten empires, lest they point to truths empires cannot control. The Vatican feared silence because silence could not be burned. Books can be destroyed, voices silenced, bodies killed. But silence filled with symbols cannot be undone. A bee carved in wood, a rose blooming in glass, a spiral etched in stone. Each carries memory beyond PayPal reach. And deeper still, the church feared what silence promised. Resurrection. For the Merovingians were not portrayed as dead, but as sleeping. The sagas, the prophecies, the carvings all whispered the same refrain. The crown shall rise again, cold but unbroken. This was not just memory, this was hope. And hope is more dangerous to power than rebellion. You close your eyes and imagine the Vatican vaults. Deep beneath Rome, manuscripts locked away, relics sealed in lead, histories rewritten. Somewhere in that labyrinth lies a report, written centuries ago, admitting what could never be said aloud, that silence is greater than decree, that memory is greater than crown, that the Merovingians were never truly gone. What would it mean if the world believed that? It would mean sanctity belongs not to Rome, but to lineage, not to PayPal blessing, but to symbols older than Christendom. It would mean that history is not what Rome declared, but what silence preserved. It would mean that power is fragile, that crowns can sleep and still return. And so, the Vatican's greatest fear was never armies, never gold, never heresy shouted from rooftops. It was the hum of bees in winter, the bloom of roses in frost, the turn of spirals in silence, symbols that said, "We are still here." You step back into the night. The cathedral of memory fades, but the fear lingers. You feel it in the air, in the weight of silence itself. The bee hums, the rose blooms, the spiral turns, and Rome trembles, not at what it knows, but at what it cannot erase. Ahead lies another revelation. If memory is greater than fear, then perhaps it is also greater than the devil himself. For silence, more than any adversary, is what Rome could never conquer. The Vatican feared many things: heresy, rebellion, rival kings, even the devil himself. But what if their greatest fear was not Satan's schemes, not Lucifer's pride, but something quieter, humbler, harder to destroy: memory? You stand now in the shadow of Rome. Picture the grand basilicas, the ringing bells, the long processions. The church painted itself as fortress against the devil. But deep inside, another anxiety gnawed. Demons could be cast out with rites, resisted with prayer. Satan himself could be banished with Christ's name. But memory cannot be exorcised. Think of it. The Merovingians erased, their hair shorn, their symbols outlawed. Yet still, the bees hum in silence, roses bloom in frost, spirals turn in wood and stone. Silence carried them, and silence cannot be burned. This persistence is what Rome could never match. The devil's rebellion was loud, fiery, defiant, easy to condemn, easy to preach against. But memory is different. It is subtle, patient, woven into lives. You cannot stand at a pulpit and thunder against spirals carved on church beams. You cannot write bulls to forbid bees in embroidery or roses in windows. These are too small, too ordinary, too invisible, and therein lies their power. You close your eyes. The silence hums like a hive. The Vatican's fear rises like incense. They feared the devil because he tempted souls, but they feared memory because it tempted history. Consider this: if people believed that a bloodline survived untouched by Rome, sanctified by silence, then Rome's monopoly on the sacred would shatter. No longer would salvation flow only through papal hands. Sanctity would be older, deeper, beyond decree. And so, better to demonize, better to whisper that Merovingians were idle, lazy, cursed. Better to frame Templars as heretics, consorting with demons, to accuse them of worshipping a head, a goat, a phantom, to cloak memory in fear, as if memory itself were the devil. But you know the difference. The devil corrupts, memory preserves. The devil burns, memory waits. The devil deceives, memory whispers. The Vatican preached that Satan was the ultimate enemy, but in practice, their actions reveal another adversary, the persistence of memory, older than PayPal blessing, immune to scissors and fire. You recall again the northern prophecy, when the blood of the southern kings meets the sleep of the ice. The crown shall rise again, cold but unbroken. These words do not roar like rebellion, they whisper. And yet, what could be more dangerous than a whisper that survives centuries? Think of the bee. Small, fragile, but its hive survives winters. Think of the rose, delicate, but it returns every spring. Think of the spiral, subtle but infinite. These are not powers Rome could control. They are powers Rome feared because they live in silence, not in spectacle. The devil thrives on spectacle, on fire, on rebellion, on temptation. Rome knew how to fight that. But how do you fight a memory that does not speak, only waits? Perhaps this is why the Templars were destroyed so ruthlessly. Not because they worshipped devils, but because they guarded memory. And memory, in Rome's eyes, was more dangerous than the devil. You walk through St. Peter's Square in your imagination. Pilgrims kneel, confessors preach, statues loom. But behind the marble, in sealed archives, lie the forbidden manuscripts, the ones that hint at Merovingian blood, Templar voyages, northern prophecies. Why keep them if they are lies? Because even Rome could not bring itself to destroy them. Because even Rome feared that erasing them entirely would give them more power. And so the paradox remains. The Vatican feared the devil in sermons, but feared memory in silence. The devil could be cast down with words. Memory could not. You open your eyes. The night around you is vast. The silence feels alive. The bee hums. The rose blooms. The spiral turns. And suddenly you see it clearly. Memory is not only greater than betrayal, it is greater than the devil. For the devil depends on noise, and memory depends on silence. And silence lasts longer. The Vatican's greatest fear, then, was not heresy, not hellfire, not Satan's throne. It was the possibility that a whisper carried by bees, roses, spirals, could outlast their decrees. That memory, once planted, could never be uprooted. That silence itself was eternal. And now you were almost at the end of the trail. Only one step remains: the convergence. The moment when symbols, sagas, stones, bloodlines, and silence fold into one. The place where the spiral finally turns inward and reveals its center. The silence waits, and you must walk into its heart. The trail has led you far through forests, fjords, churches, and sagas. You have walked with kings whose hair was shorn, with knights whose ships vanished, with villagers who whispered of strangers in white mantles. You have traced bees across golden tombs, roses across windows of stone, spirals carved in timber and rock. And now the path curves inward. The spiral has brought you to its center. You stand in a cavern, its ceiling low, its air heavy with damp earth. A single lamp flickers in your hand. The walls around you are scratched, faint carvings barely visible. Spirals, again, always spirals. But here, they do not drift outward. They turn inward, tighter and tighter, until they vanish into a single point. This is the convergence, the place where all threads meet. The bee hums here not as symbol, but as presence. In the stillness, you hear it faintly, as if the walls themselves are alive. The rose blooms, not as flower, but as geometry, carved into overlapping circles, petals upon petals, eternity unfolding. And the spiral turns not into infinity, but into the center, the core, the hidden heart of memory. You realize now what the silence has been saying all along. Memory is not scattered, not random. It is a spiral, drawing you inward, to the point where all symbols, all bloodlines, all stories converge. What lies at the center, not proof, not relic, not a crown or a king, but something harder to destroy. A record older than ink, older than papal decree. A memory written in clay and scroll, hidden in silence, surviving because it does not shout. You imagine a scribe in the 14th century, sealing a manuscript in wax, burying it under stone. He knows the Vatican will condemn it. He knows Rome will burn it if found. But he also knows the spiral will carry it forward, hidden, waiting. Perhaps those scrolls still lie in some northern crypt. Perhaps they were carried farther still, across seas, across ages. Or perhaps they were never meant to be found only to remind us that something was preserved. The spiral's secret is not that it never ends, it is that it always returns. And so you stand here, in silence, and you see what Rome feared. Not armies, not devils, not even bloodlines. They feared what you feel now, the inevitability of return. Memory, once planted, spirals back, no matter how many times cut, buried, erased. The Merovingians may have fallen, their hair may have been shorn, their names may have been defamed, but their memories spiraled outward into bees, roses, sagas, churches, and now inward again. Into this moment, this recognition, you whisper to yourself, the kingdom does not perish, it sleeps. Mainstream historians will continue to scoff. They will call this coincidence, imagination, conspiracy. They will say, bees are decoration, roses are Christian, spirals are geometry. But you have walked the spiral, and you know the truth. Coincidence does not hum. Coincidence does not bloom. Coincidence does not turn with such persistence across centuries and lands. Silence is not empty. Silence is a vault, and you are standing inside it. The Vatican's fear, then, was justified. For memory greater than the devil cannot be defeated by decree. It cannot be bound by chains. It cannot be erased by fire. It only waits, spiraling inward, until someone listens again. You breathe, and the cavern seems to echo. Perhaps it is only your heartbeat, or perhaps it is the hum of bees, the bloom of roses, the turn of spirals. You understand now that the story is not about kings who return, or crowns hidden in frost, or ships that vanished. It is about memory itself, how it survives in silence, how it lives in you, because you have listened. Tonight, you are the vault. You carry the hum of bees, the bloom of roses, the turn of spirals. You carry the memory Rome feared, the silence it could never conquer. And in doing so, the spiral turns again, not outward into history, not inward into secrecy, but through you into the present. The silence does not end, It only waits. And now, it waits with you.